Ted Cruz, thank you so much for your time. We appreciate it.
Jack, good to see you.
Good to see you. Do you support the Inflation Reduction Act? I gather you probably don't based on your laugh. Why not? And what do you say to Democrats who say this will reduce the deficit?
Well, it's a terrible bill, and the title, I will say, is something directly out of George Orwell. Because the reason we have inflation, the reason we have prices skyrocketing, the reason gas prices are so high is because the Democrat policies of out of control spending and out of control debt. And so their solution is more out of control spending, and on top of that, higher taxes too. It's literally like taking a bonfire and pouring gasoline on it. It makes the problems worse. If you look at this bill, what the Democrats are trying to do, it's going to hurt small businesses, it's going to hurt manufacturers, it's going to hurt working men and women across this country. You look at the different elements of this bill. One, they have a tax on businesses that takes away the ability to deduct for investments in new equipment and new machinery. That hammers manufacturing. The projections are that 50% of the harms from this taxes fall upon manufacturing, upon blue-collar jobs. Look, if there's a plant in Dallas that is thinking of maybe putting an additional line to make more cars or make more trucks, right now they can expense that investment, which means the tax code incentivizes them to create more jobs, to generate more productivity. The Democrat bill disincentivizes that, and it will result in a lot less investment, a lot fewer jobs. On top of that, there's an element in this bill that is designed to sneak in a backdoor overturning of the Supreme Court's recent decision, West Virginia versus EPA, to give the EPA the power to regulate and put billions of dollars of costs on small businesses and manufacturers across this country. Not only that, Jack, there are a bunch of new fees and taxes on oil and gas in particular. So if you're ticked off at how much you're paying at the gas pump, guess what the Democrats want to do? They want to jack it up even more and have you spend even more. And to top all of it off, this bill also proposes 87,000 new IRS agents. And let's be clear, those agents are not there to go after the billionaires, to go after the giant companies. They're there to go after small businesses. They're there to go after families. And I have crisscrossed the state of Texas. I've crisscrossed the country. I've never encountered a Texan who says, what we really need is 87,000 more IRS agents. That is a desire of big government Democrats to send IRS agents like locusts to hammer Texans and Americans. I think it's a terrible idea.
So what is your solution to high food prices and other inflationary prices that people are experiencing?
Well, it's a very simple solution, which is stop spending money we don't have. If you look at where inflation comes from, look, prices are all connected to the money supply. Let me give a simple example. Let's suppose an apple is $2. If you get a bunch of politicians in Washington that double the number of dollars in the world, that print a bunch of money, you can expect the price of an apple to go from $2 to $4 because there are twice as many dollars in the world. It's not exactly right, but that is roughly how it works. What we've seen under Joe Biden and Pelosi and Schumer is they're just spending trillions of dollars we don't have, and they're either borrowing it from China or they're just printing it. That is fueling inflation. And then on top of that, they're making it particularly bad on gasoline prices. Why is that? Because for a year and a half, they have waged a Green New Deal war on oil and gas production in the United States. We have seen dozens of policies from Joe Biden aimed at hurting Texas, aimed at reducing production, aimed at driving up the costs to fill your truck, to fill your minivan, and I think Texans and Americans are really hurting as a result.
What is your reaction to the vote in Kansas on abortion, and what impact, if any, do you think it will have on the midterms here in Texas in November?
Well, listen, the vote in Kansas, the Supreme Court, as you know, recently overturned Roe versus Wade. I think that was an incredible victory for democracy. Abortion's an issue that people disagree on, and they disagree strongly. And there are people with good faith, genuine, deep disagreements, passionate disagreements. It's a personal and it's a passionate issue. What the Supreme Court did in Roe versus Wade is in 1973, 7 unelected judges said, you silly voters, you don't get to decide this issue. We know better than you, we're going to take it away from you. For the first 185 years of our country's history, it had been the voters who decided. It had been the American people. That's how the Constitution resolves contentious policy issues like abortion. Roe versus Wade said, nope, the voters don't get to decide. I think the Supreme Court's decision earlier this summer was a tremendous victory for democracy, because now we, the people, will decide, and what it's going to mean is state by state, the rules and the laws are going to vary. And in bright blue states, states like New York, states like California, you're going to continue to see either no restrictions or virtually no restrictions, essentially unlimited abortion on demand up until the moment of birth. In redder states, states like Texas, you're going to see some meaningful restrictions, and the restrictions are going to vary depending upon the values and the mores of the citizens. I think that's how our Constitution was designed to operate, that the people should decide through the democratic process.
Kansas is a red state.
Yeah.
So Texas, the trigger law is already set to go into effect August 25th. But how concerned are you that it may backfire on Republicans in November?
Listen, I believe what's going to happen in November, I think we're going to see not just a red wave, but a tidal wave. I'm spending a lot of time barnstorming the state of Texas. I'm not on the ballot this time, but I am helping other candidates. In particular, I'm helping candidates running for the House and running for the Senate. In the House, I'll make a prediction right now. I think South Texas is going to turn red this year.
How many congressional districts?
I think we could win 3. There are 3 seats in South Texas, all of which have been historically Democrat for over 100 years. We just had a special elections a few weeks back in a seat that runs along the Gulf Coast from just south of Corpus Christi all the way down to Brownsville. That is a seat, it's the second most Hispanic district in the entire country. It's a seat that hasn't been Republican since 1871. And in that special elections, the voters elected a Republican, an Hispanic woman, Myra Flores. I endorsed her, I campaigned for her. I think we're going to see Myra win. I think we're going to see Cassie Garcia win. I think we're going to see Monica de la Cruz win. And to have 3 Republicans represent the entirety of the Rio Grande Valley, all Hispanic women, that is a generational shift. Those districts have not had Republicans representing them for 100 years. And the reason for that shift is the policies of the Democrats have gotten so extreme. I spend a lot of time on our southern border. You can't see the chaos of our southern border, the 3.5 million people who've crossed illegally under Joe Biden. You can't see the human suffering, the misery it's causing, and defend it. And it's why the people of South Texas, when I was just down there a few weeks ago, I brought a group of 7 senators down to the border to see what was happening. It is worse, Jack, than I've ever seen it. We sat down with farmers and ranchers that showed me photograph after photograph of dead bodies they found on their farms, dead bodies of pregnant women, of elderly people, of children, the traffickers abandoned to die. We went out on midnight patrol with the Border Patrol. Within minutes, encountered groups crossing illegally. You don't have to go look for them. I mean, you see them almost immediately. The Border Patrol agents showed us a patch of grass about 300 yards away, where just a few weeks earlier, 2 little girls aged 5 and 6 had been brutally raped by the human traffickers. And the Border Patrol had to give emergency medical care to these little girls. You cannot see this misery, this suffering, this disaster, and defend it, and it's why the people of South Texas, they see their hospitals overflowing, they see their prisons overflowing, they see their schools overflowing, they see children being assaulted by vicious cartels, and they're fed up. They want to change the direction. I think that's going to happen in South Texas. I think it's going to happen all over the country.
I wanted to ask you about school safety.
Yeah.
Back to school,
Yeah.
as you know. And survivors of the Santa Fe high school shooting
Yes.
have told us that they felt that the laws passed by the state in 2019 didn't have any teeth to make sure that the school districts were complying with the
Yeah.
new standards. I know you're in Congress at the federal level, but how do you react to that, and what can you do to make sure that there are teeth and that these school districts comply?
So I think we need to do much, much more to keep our schools safe. I've been on the ground in every one of these mass murders we've had in the country. I was in Uvalde the day after that shooting. I was in Santa Fe the day of the shooting. I was in Sutherland Springs. I was in Midland, Odessa. I was in El Paso. I was in Dallas. We've seen too many of these. It is horrific. and we need to stop them. And we need to focus on, all right, what policies actually will stop deranged lunatics from carrying out mass murders? And I've introduced legislation called Cruz that is designed to do exactly that, to go after the bad guys, to go after felons and fugitives and those with serious mental illness who try to illegally buy firearms, to prosecute them, to lock them up, to put them in jail, to create a gun crime task force at the Department of Justice so that if a criminal commits a crime with a gun, we prosecute him and put him in federal jail so he's not on the street terrorizing innocent people. And when it comes to schools in particular, you know, you mentioned Santa Fe. I remember sitting down at a round table with the families of Santa Fe. And one of the things that was deeply frustrating is there's a pattern to these school shootings that keeps playing out over and over again. If you look at Parkland in Florida, the shooter there went in through an unlocked back door, he got into the classroom, he began murdering children. In Santa Fe, the shooter went in through an unlocked side door, he got into the classroom, began murdering children. One of the things we talked about with the Santa Fe families is that if you want to improve school safety, we need to stop having unlocked back doors where a criminal can get access to the kids without facing law enforcement first. And if you think about best practices for making a vulnerable target safer, think about a bank, think about a courthouse, think about a federal building. You have one main entrance, you have fire exits, sure, but you have one main entrance that you send people through, and you have armed police officers at that main entrance. What is infuriating about Uvalde is once again the shooter came in through an open back door, he got into the classroom. The legislation I've introduced would provide $2.5 billion in funding to enhance school safety, to do things like ensure there's one main entrance, to ensure that you have greater physical security, and it will double the number of police officers on campuses. And it would also provide $10 billion for mental health counseling so that troubled young men who may be thinking of doing something horrific, we can intervene and stop them before it happens. And I'm sorry to say, the Democrats filibustered Cruz. They didn't want it to pass, not because they disagreed with anything in it, but because their focus is on gun control. They want to disarm law-abiding citizens rather than stop the criminals. I think we need to do more to protect our kids. We need to do more to stop the criminals, and I'm going to keep fighting for that.
Let me ask you, as far as the truth, a lot of parents in Uvalde are concerned they're not going to get the full truth. The Justice Department is investigating the response. How will you make sure that the full truth gets out?
Well, Uvalde, I will say, it is deeply frustrating. When I was there the day afterwards, I sat down with law enforcement, and they did not tell us the truth. They did not tell us the truth the day after the shooting. In fact, almost every single thing they described that had happened turned out to be false.
And they lied to you?
I was sitting at the table. I was sitting there with Greg Abbott and John Cornyn, and everything they said about that day proved false. You look at the report of what happened in Uvalde, that you had hundreds of law enforcement officers, that they stayed there 77 minutes before they went into the classroom. They're hearing that lunatic murder children and they didn't go into the classroom. It is utterly unacceptable. There is no good law enforcement explanation. They had a ballistic shield within 15 minutes of being there. They should have breached, and they should have breached immediately to stop an active shooter. That is any common sense law enforcement protocol. When you have an active shooter, you breach to protect the innocent. And so I understand the families of Uvalde, they're angry. They have a right to be angry, and they're frustrated because the system did not work there. And I hope that the state, I hope that local law enforcement learns lessons about, let's not let this happen again. But I'll also mention something. A decade ago, I introduced legislation that was called Grassley Cruz. This was in 2013 when I was newly elected to the Senate. One of the elements of it was $300 million for school safety. Again, the Democrats filibustered Grassley Cruz. They prevented that from passing into law. If it had passed, and if the elementary school in Uvalde had been able to get a grant to lock the back doors, to have one central entrance, and to have an armed police officer at that entrance, instead of the shooter being able to get in a classroom and begin murdering kids, you could have had the shooter come to the main entrance, immediately encounter law enforcement, where they could have shot and killed him and saved 19 children and 2 teachers. And so I'm frustrated that politics in Washington is preventing us from taking real and common sense steps to keep our kids safer.
I guess the question is, what are you going to do to make sure that the truth comes out?
Well, look, I'm going to continue to press for fair and objective investigations, either at the state level or the federal level. I think they're both ongoing. It's important to look back and to learn from the mistakes. The law enforcement response in Uvalde, there were serious mistakes, and I think we need to take real steps to ensure those mistakes aren't repeated.
Democrats in Dallas today are gathering, and they at a news conference claim extremism is on display here at CPAC. Your reaction?
Well, you know, there's some irony to that, given what's happened to the Democrat Party in Washington. You know, I think about 5 years ago. 5 years ago in the Senate, there was one open socialist in the Senate. That was Bernie Sanders. He admitted he was a socialist. None of the other Senate Democrats would say that they were socialists. Today, Joe Biden's top priority is passing Bernie Sanders' socialist budget. You look at the Democrat Party. 5 years ago, Democrats used to say they favor border security. Today, they're for open borders. 5 years ago, you used to be able to get Democrats to come together supporting law enforcement. Today, you have radicals in the Democratic Party calling for abolishing the police and defunding the police. And so when it comes to extremism, there's a reason that so many young people, so many Hispanics, so many African Americans, so many suburban moms are moving away from the Democratic Party and coming Republican, because they're looking at this angry, woke, censoring, radical leftist party. They're saying, that ain't me. You know, I gotta say, you think about John F. Kennedy. John F. Kennedy, as a Democrat president of the country, led the fight to cut taxes, to cut regulations. He said, if we cut taxes and we cut regulations, small businesses will prosper, we'll have more jobs and more prosperity. He did that, and the economy boomed. John F. Kennedy also stood up to the Soviet Union, stood up to communism. I gotta say, JFK would be chased out of today's Democrat Party and tarred and feathered. And I talk every day across Texas to people who've been Democrats their whole lives who say, listen, I didn't leave the Democrat Party, they left me. So I think it's rich they use language like extremism, given just how radical and extreme the Democrats in Washington are.
Senator Ted Cruz, thank you so much. We appreciate your time very much.
Thank you, Jack.